Here we go. So welcome for those of you joining us for this kind of sneak preview of our upcoming Seeing Red Conference, Radical Hope, being held October 19th through the 22nd in beautiful Stonington, Connecticut. And I am here this afternoon with Elizabeth Nelson. Elizabeth is the author of Psyche's Knife. She is going to be one of our featured keynotes at the Seeing Red Conference. Let me just tell you a little bit about her before we go into this opportunity to have a chat with her and for her to introduce herself to those of you who are going to be at the conference, or maybe if you're thinking about coming to the conference. Elizabeth is a psychologist of the soul by training and inclination. She serves as core faculty and dissertation policy director of Pacifica Graduate Institute, where she has been teaching since 2003. She lectures in a broad range of courses in research process, methodology, scholarly writing, dissertation development, along with classes in dream, literature, cultural studies. Her own research interests focus on Jung's concept of the shadow, gender, and power, with a particular interest in how women discover and express a vibrant, embodied authority. This interest has led to her current research on women serving in the American Armed Forces and the distinctive ways they imagine and express their martial nature, which includes forcefulness, assertiveness, and aggression, qualities that are as natural to females as they are to males and essential to our wholeness. Elizabeth holds a Ph.D. in depth psychology, along with undergrad degrees in economics and political science, a master's degree in English Lit, and an abiding interest in feminist studies. And along the way, she has been a dancer, choreographer, martial artist, mountain climber, and yoga practitioner. She's also a professional writer and editor and has a coaching practice for aspiring authors. She has a number of articles in anthology. She has a number of books, Psyche's Knife, as I mentioned, along with The Art of Inquiry, a depth psychological perspective that was co-authored with Joseph Coppin. So Elizabeth, we are thrilled to have you as a featured keynote for this conference. And welcome to Seeing Red, and welcome to this coming October conference. And is there something you'd like to share with us and maybe with people who are watching, or the women who might be attending, about yourself in particular?
Oh, well, thank you very much, Loralee. I really appreciate the invitation to speak at the conference, and I'm looking forward to it. It feels like there's a lot of energy around the issues of women and unsilencing females and the feminine, and my own particular interest in authentic expressions of power for women, which of course includes the power to speak up and say our truth.
Well, yeah, you know, these themes in particular of femininity and power, and especially, you know, this is something that we are right now engaged in working on in this 9-month online course that we're offering, the Emerging Feminine, and it's really it's incredible when you start diving into this material and looking into your own psyche as a woman and the lived reality of your own experience, and where each of us as individual women hold power, and and the oftentimes complex way in which we hold our own power, or need to project that out onto, typically it's a masculine figure, because for a lot of different reasons, the way in which that happens. So I'm wondering if you might be able to kind of speak to this. I think that I hope, you know, and here's the radical hope, and we'll talk to that a little bit more, but I hope that what we're really seeing emerge, and it's emerging, I think, in a creative way, which is usually the case. We see the emergence of a new consciousness coming through creatively before we see it popularized in the collective consciousness. It's coming from the unconscious, and typically that's being spoken in a very creative language and vernacular first. Yeah. And I think we're seeing the emergence of a feminine expression of authentic power and authority in a way that we've been denied it in the past. Because I think in our mythologies, in our theologies, and even in our psychologies, femininity and power has been expressed as a duality, and powerful femininity in all the ways that's expressed is more often than not transmogrified. It's a monstrosity. So can you speak to some of, I know, the extensive work and research you've done regarding that?
Yes. Oh, where to begin? Actually, I think I want to begin by acknowledging one of the thinkers who has really helped me understand power, the word power, and how much is wrapped up in that. And that is James Hillman and his work, Kinds of Power. And he does a wonderful job in that book of pointing out that power as domination has dominated our idea of power. In other words, when we think of power, we think of power over another. We think of it as a kind of a domination or a tyranny, a dictatorship. And there are very few women that I've spoken with, I don't think I can recall a single one, who is comfortable with the idea of power as domination, power as power over. And yet, when I open up that word and I say, look, following Hillman, there are many, many kinds of power that are available to us. So what we need to do is make our thinking about power more subtle. And once we do that, and we realize, for example, influence is power. And so if I were to ask a woman, would you like to be influential, or are you influential in any arena of your life? Usually the response is absolutely, yes, I am, or yes, I want to be. When we think about power as, actually charisma is a kind of power. I think of attention as a form of power. If I'm offering you my attention, I'm giving you the most precious thing that I have, which is my time. And in that relationship, in that moment, I'm making it possible for you to understand yourself, for you to understand your own power. So I suppose that I begin with, let's start with a more nuanced idea of what power is and how many kinds of power there are. And then think through where we actually exercise power in our lives, where we would like to exercise more power, and where we would like to exercise it more artfully. That's where I would start.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I think this idea, and I know these have been some of the ongoing conversations we're still having in Seeing Red, but this idea of power versus authority, and where does our power come from as women? Where is that power? What are the roots? What's the source of that power or authority? So influence as authority, and I think that there is a connection between authenticity, being able to speak or share or exist or author ourselves from that most authentic place. And, and so then the struggle often becomes that parts of ourselves as women, those most powerful places of ourselves as women, have often been transmogrified. And so our connection to our own authenticity has to be unpacked. It has to be demonsterized. It has to be, I don't know if you can share relative to any of that part of it.
Yes, absolutely. I can think of some specific examples. If we are raised with the idea that physical strength is a male or masculine quality, and if we're a physically strong woman, somehow we are perverse or monstrous. Somehow we're not women. We're not feminine enough. Then, what young girl would want to develop her own physical strength? And yet when we see someone like Simone Biles, win several gold medals at the Olympics, and we realize just how beautiful she is as a powerful young woman, it's possible that an image like that can help young women who are also either physically strong or aspire to physical strength and agility and grace, that she can inspire them to say, yes, that's female, that's feminine, that's not perverse or strange. I can do that. I have permission. Mm-hmm. And so what we see, I think images are extraordinarily powerful. Role models, mentors are extraordinarily powerful because they can show the way. They can show us what's possible in terms of our authentic selves, which can, there's so many expressions of authenticity. So that's just one simple example.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example. I mean, and I think you're bringing up a really important point, which is being able to see it being modeled. You know, that I think that is such a critical piece for this emerging feminine, is putting that archetypal, I shouldn't say that because I don't think it's singular, I think it's plural, those archetypal identities of the powerful feminine, seeing that modeled so that, you know, we can see that, whether we're talking. So if you could tell us a little bit about, because I love the topic that you're going to be sharing on at the conference, about this emerging fierce feminine. I think you said the emerging fierce young feminine. You may have qualified it a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, obviously we don't want to give away the whole meal, but can you give us an appetizer here about, you know, where your work is situated with that?
Yes, I would be happy to. There are several people who noticed that right around 2004, 2005, there was a fascinating and abrupt change in the stories that were hitting popular culture. And the big change that people noticed is, and these are educated observers, they noticed that fiction franchises, which includes novels as well as the films that were made of the novels, began to feature fierce young women at the center of their own story. You know, so talk about modeling authenticity. These are young women. They are fierce in many, many different ways. But rather than being the female sidekick to a male-centered story, the females were right there, right at the heart of the story. The whole story revolved around them. And this is a huge change in popular culture. And popular culture offers up images of femininity, masculinity, gender relations. It offers up models of who we can be and how we can be. So it's very, very influential. Anyway, I started paying attention to this as an archetypal psychologist, noticing some of the similarities among the female-centered stories, noticing some of the similarities among the characters, and also paying attention to the differences. There's some very interesting differences. And one of the things that you see is that each of these young women are powerful in their own way, but they demonstrate different kinds of power. And in many cases, the stories show them growing into their power and what that took, what kind of a journey that was. And that journey is continuing. That shift in the fairy tale is continuing. I mean, we're speaking now, less than 2 weeks after the new Wonder Woman film was just released around the world. It's breaking box office records everywhere, and it should. It's a fantastic fantasy of a very powerful woman, young woman, highly trained, highly skilled, who also is a loving young woman who has deep values that she abides by. And so I think, this unfolding interest in women at the center of their own stories is I think it's going to be with us for quite a while.
I think you're right, and I hope so. I was going to ask if you've been to see the Wonder Woman film, because it's interesting to me. All in the same week. Watching and reading my Facebook feed, whatever you want to say about Facebook, it is what it is, right? But in the same week, I'm seeing incredible articles extolling, and I saw Wonder Woman as well, and thought it was a great film in so many ways. And like you said, love that it showed all the different ways in which feminine power is expressed, or not all, but it gave us a diversity of feminine power. The same week, I'm seeing coming in on my news feed, you may have seen it, but I think it was a CNN reporter who had to kind of call out a male, he wasn't a reporter, but he was a political commentator, because he was characterizing Senator Kamala Harris's interviewing of Jeff Sessions as hysterical, as hysteria. And I was so glad that she didn't just, say, okay, and let that one go by. I mean, but so we're very much, I think, culturally, and in this moment in history, we're seeing this convergence, of the old order and the old consciousness and the new consciousness that is trying to emerge, and we're seeing it, I think, being modeled through in cinema, which is wonderful. I think the more difficult piece of this is how we take this in as women, young, middle-aged, old, elder women. How do we take this in, and how do we begin to integrate it and to act it out and to live it out and to bring what has probably been transmogrified in our own unconscious to begin to work with that? I think this is part of, that deep work that Seeing Red speaks to, that your work and research, I know, speaks to as well. Any pointers or tips on ways to facilitate or navigate that process?
Yeah, I have a couple of very, very strong ideas, and I am noticing. I was paying attention to Senator Kamala Harris and what happened with her this week, and the way that women politicians or representatives are, in general, they have a tendency to be more shut down, more interrupted than their male counterparts. We've seen research on this. There was research on the Supreme Court justices and how often the female justices are interrupted or stopped compared to the male justices. And the difference is startling. So there is an old knee-jerk reaction from the old order where if a woman stands up and speaks strongly, she is labeled as hysteric. That's been with us for a very long time. And we do need to pay attention to it. We do need to not let those moments go by. We need to stand up to those moments and say, no, you're wrong. This is not hysteria. This is a legitimate objection that I'm voicing in an appropriate way, in an appropriate forum. So we need to stand up for those moments. We need to notice them and stand up, which is, that in itself is a very important move, right there, just standing up. The other thing that occurs to me is that other women need to, and people need to support a woman speaking up when it happens, wherever it happens, whether it's in a national forum, like Senate hearings, or whether it's, in the classroom, or whether it's in the family, or whether, it's at the grocery store, or wherever this shows up, whenever or wherever a woman who speaks up is shut down because she's female and perhaps because she's saying something uncomfortable. Others around her need to notice and support that.
Yeah.
And then the final thing I would say about that is that the more women come into their own authority as speakers, I think we need to give each other opportunities to be strong, powerful speakers. And I think at least I feel an obligation to mentor younger women to become strong, powerful speakers.
Mm-hmm.
I want to help them find their voice.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I feel absolutely obligated to do, and joyfully obligated to do.
Mm-hmm. I think it's wonderful, and I think you're bringing up a really important point, which is how do we support each other? As whether it's older women, whatever, supporting younger women, but I think younger women supporting elder women as well, because I think the elderly feminine is a powerful voice that has been silenced and exists almost in invisibility within a patriarchal culture that links visibility primarily to sexuality. And so that then when that changes and begins to change for a woman, then what happens to her ability to be seen in a culture, and not only seen. I mean, there was a really great article, I think Lane, you passed it along to me, or I think it was a video feed, talking about this interplay of seeing sexuality as the primary vehicle or the only vehicle to influence power and authority in the outer world, and the obvious problems with that, and where that becomes problematic. So I think that this exploration of the fierce feminine that you're going to be bringing to the conference, and the fact that there's no one path to that. I mean, that I think is really important. There's no one way to that. There's no one, and finding your voice doesn't even necessarily have to include words. It may be you're painting your voice, it may be you're acting, you're singing, you're a musician, but being able to put that out there in a way that influences the culture. And I think that that's where, for me, that's where the radical hope lives. When we're talking about radical hope, it's not about this ephemeral, ambiguous wishing and hoping it'll get better. That then we're not talking about the kind of hope that then absolves us from responsibility to act, responsibility to own. Radical hope, and that's where I think the word radical comes, is I think a hope that we take ownership of and for ourselves individually and for ourselves collectively as women, and how we become women in the world, how we exist as women in the world. And so the radical part of that, someone wrote it, and I can't remember who, but remember this statement, wrote this: it costs you something to be yourself. That was the statement. It costs you something to be yourself. And so I think this radical hope has to exist with that realization that, yes, this comes, this is ground that is gained, but it's ground that is gained with a price. But that price is nothing in comparison to the cost of remaining silent or remaining disempowered or remaining. So, and I think for me, that radical hope, it's rooted and grounded in recognizing the cost, and in recognizing and creating a container where it can be moved forward. We had Damaris Ware actually shared recently on a Seeing Red. She wrote the incredible book, Young and Feminism, and she was she shared a letter that Einstein wrote to his younger daughter at the very end of his life. And what he wrote to his daughter was that the greatest energy force in the universe is love. He said, at the end of the day, this is where, because he said love is light. And he said, this is where it is. So I think that when we're talking about femininity and power and radical hope, I think that it has to be held in this container that recognizes and holds genuine compassion, empathy, and love for each other. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that from your perspective relative to this emerging, this fierce feminine archetype, this, the martial nature, all of that. How does that play into this theme of radical hope for you and for your work?
Well, I go to what you're saying about love, that love is so central. And one of the things that I that's very noticeable about all of the women, the fierce young women that I have analyzed, is that they are all nourishing or developing their own power on behalf of something they love. Mm. So the love is never selfish. It's always abundant. It's not self-serving. It serves either their tribe, their group, their family, or a cause. And so the love is so essential to the expression of their power, whatever kind of power they express. So I would start by saying that. I completely agree with you that we cannot gain ourselves without effort. Authenticity does cost something. And it's easier perhaps for some people than for others, but it always takes effort. And I would say, again, going back to the theme of love, it probably begins with loving the gift of your life, own life.
Yeah.
And not wanting to squander that gift.
Yeah.
And I think something that seems to appeal to women that I've spoken with is the idea that we become more ourselves through the acts of giving, through our acts of giving. In other words, our commitment to what we love does not diminish us. It enhances us.
I think that's beautiful. And I think on that note, I love what you just shared. I think that's a beautiful note to end this conversation, but to be continued and to be continued in depth with you in Stonington, Connecticut. So Elizabeth, thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for sharing your work. And we really look forward to getting to know you better and getting to know your work. So for those of you listening in, please get in touch with us at the office. You can email us at seeingredconference@gmail.com if you have any questions. If there's opportunities to present, workshops are available. So get on our website or give us a call or an email. We'd love to get you connected. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I look forward to talking and sharing more with you.
Thank you so much, Loralee. I do too.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.